So welcome to today's webinar for My Whole Self Day. It's fantastic to have so many of you joining us today. I can see we've got over 1,000 people joined so far, and there are more people joining as I'm continuing to talk to you. You're very, very welcome. My name is Sarah McIntosh, and I'm the Chief Executive here at Mental Health First Aid England, and also the Chief Executive of the Association of Mental Health First Aiders. For those of you that maybe haven't heard of Mental Health First Aid England before, we're a not-for-profit social enterprise, and our mission is to train 1 in 10 of the population in mental health knowledge and skills. We also provide the first and only membership body for mental health first aiders in the UK, and we provide ongoing support and development for mental health first aiders in their role. And I know we've got lots of mental health first aiders on today's webinar as well, so welcome and hello to all of you. Just a few tips to help you to get the most out of today's session, if that's okay. We're going to record the webinar, so you will, following today's webinar, you'll get a link to the recording and a link to the presentation slides as well. So you don't have to take any notes, and you can share the link with other colleagues that you may find would find this webinar of interest. Please do use the Q&A function today. We've got a fantastic panel of speakers, and we're going to spend quite a bit of time today asking them questions and getting their insights and wisdom based on their expertise and their roles as well. So use the Q&A function to post your questions for our panel for our Q&A session later. And you can also use the chat as well. So you can chat to other attendees during today's webinar and share some tips and hints and best practice as well amongst yourselves, so you can learn from the chat too as we go. In terms of the agenda today, we're going to spend some time talking about psychological safety and our My Whole Self campaign and how you can get more involved with the campaign itself. We're going to spend a little bit of time looking at the role of managers in psychological safety in workplaces as well, and how they can support psychological safety in their workplace and their cultures. And then the main event really is we're going to be chatting to our panel to get their individual insights on everything to do with My Whole Self, psychological safety and workplace mental health and wellbeing as well. So do post some questions in there so we can get some great insights from them later in the session. Okay, so I'm going to get our panelists to introduce themselves. We've got a couple of fantastic panelists here, as you can see, but rather than me go through and talk about who they are and what they do, we're going to get them to introduce themselves in turn using our My Whole Selfie template. Some of you may have used a My Whole Selfie before and shared that as part of My Whole Self Day. There's quite a number of these selfies on social media today, but we thought it would be helpful for you to get to know our panelists a little bit more by them talking about their selfie. So you can see my whole selfie here today. There's some interesting fun facts about me, but there's also some important facts about me that impact me in the workplace setting. So I'm a mum and a carer, so flexible working is important to me, and having colleagues that understand that and support me with that flexibility from time to time is really important to me. I also have tinnitus and hearing loss as well. So things like sound equipment, lighting, seating in the office, where I sit in a meeting so that I can hear people effectively is really important to me. So there's a number of factors in there that I really do talk about in the workplace and really do need support with to help me feel at my best and perform at my best. I'm going to move on now to Layla and get Layla to introduce herself with her My Whole Selfie.
Hi there, I'm Layla McCay. I'm Director of Policy at the NHS Confederation. So as you can see, I am health policy specialist, but aside from that, I am a writer and a reader and a theatre goer. So I'm interested in storytelling and how we communicate with each other. I'm interested in walking, which I think is a key thing for maintaining wellness. And me being a gay woman really affects lots of ways in which I interact and experience the workplace.
Brilliant. Thank you, Layla. We're going to move on now. I'm going to ask Melissa to introduce yourself.
Thanks, Sarah. So I'm really excited to be here today. So I'm Dr. Melissa Carr and I work at Henley Business School. I'm the director of our World of Work Institute, and I look after the area to do with equity, diversity and inclusion in organisations. I guess in terms of sort of bringing my whole self to work. So I'm a single parent, so I've been a single parent since my children were 1 and 3. And I'm very grateful to various different line managers and organisations who've been able to support that. Otherwise, I am a keen trail runner. I love being outside, running, anything to do with kind of fitness, yoga, anything like that. I actually love. And I'm also a kind of cat owner, so I've locked her in the kitchen, so hopefully she won't be interrupting the webinar. But yeah, thanks, Sarah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Melissa. And finally, Lauren.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Lauren. I work as an employee relations business partner at a cheese factory called Norseland. We are down in Somerset. So a little bit about me. I love my job in HR. Favourite part being the people that I interact with, that I get to meet, the different cultures that I can learn about. I'm also a mental health first aider here at Norseland and sort of run our mental health first aid team and the campaigns that we put on. I'm a Labrador mum. He takes up a huge amount of my time, but it's a great excuse to get out and, enjoy the sunshine that we've got at the moment. And as well as that, yeah, shopping obsessed and currently planning a wedding. So any well-being tips and stress tips right now are very helpful.
A lot on at the moment, Lauren. There's a lot of
Yes.
cheese fans in the chat as well. So lots of love for
Amazing.
cheese being shown, which is great. Welcome to all of you. For those of you on today's webinar, if you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat and also tell us a little bit about yourselves, but also if you have celebrated the My Whole Self campaign before in your workplaces, do share some tips and some information about how you have marked the day and some of the activities that you use to promote My Whole Self campaign in your workplaces as well. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about psychological safety now. So our My Whole Self campaign has psychological safety at its heart. So some of you may not be as familiar with this concept and may not know a huge amount about the My Whole Self campaign. So we thought we'd take a couple of minutes just to introduce you or maybe reintroduce you to the concept. So I think interestingly, it'd be good to hear from people in the chat about what does psychological safety mean to you. So just take a couple of minutes. Have a little think about it. What does the phrase psychological safety mean to you? Okay, so I can see being comfortable, being able to be myself, to be accepted, having a safe space, not being judged or discriminated against, having trust and support from my colleagues. Trust is coming up quite a few times. So at its core, psychological safety is about trust and respect. It means that you can be in a workplace where your colleagues will listen without judgment and will treat you fairly without any judgment at all. Your leaders are more likely to model vulnerability and talk openly about themselves and some of the information about their whole self as well and what that means for them in a workplace setting. And there'll be policies and processes and a culture that's all about fairness and dignity for all, really. Google did a landmark project a few years ago, which some of you may have heard of, called the Aristotle study. And the study was designed to understand what are the key elements that mean that teams can really excel and deliver high performance. And they found 5 key elements, one of which was that psychological safety was a huge influence on the way that people felt able to be their whole self, to be open, to be innovative, to be creative and be productive and feel a sense of belonging in the workplace. And that in turn drove a higher level of performance from a team as well. So when people feel unafraid to challenge ways of working, their engagement rises. And when people feel that their talents matter, their well-being improves. So if people feel that they don't have to hide parts of themselves or things that they're struggling with, then effectively they can be their whole self at work and perform better as an individual and ultimately as a team and an organisation. So teams that feel safe and connected do work better together. So on that premise, Mental Health First Aid England have developed our My Whole Self campaign. It's in its 6th year now, and it's had a fantastic response. So we've seen over 200 organisations take part last year, and we know that there are more planning to take part in the campaign this year. It's a year-round campaign. So although we have a My Whole Self Day for people to participate in and to talk more about psychological safety in the workplace, and bringing your whole self to work. We do know that lots of organisations will use some of the activities and resources that we provide to talk about psychological safety all year round. So please do check out our website and have a look at some of the activities that you can share in your own workplaces and plan some activities in for your own workplace as well. So why is My Whole Self campaign really important? Well, I guess in the current economic, political and social climate, it's really critical that organisations cultivate inclusivity, belonging, and think about how to create psychologically safe workplaces. There's a heck of a lot in the news at the moment about equality, diversity and inclusion, and organisations that are rolling back on some of those agendas as well. And that's going to have a huge impact on people's psychological safety at work. As businesses are facing new challenges, nurturing psychological safety and enabling employees to bring their whole selves to work is not just about a moral imperative, but it's really imperative for productivity and long-term organisation and business success as well. Some of our research last year showed us that 31% of people agree that not being able to bring your whole self to work has a huge impact on their productivity levels. And we also know that 34% of people said that not being able to be your whole self at work has a huge impact on their mental health as well. It's not just an individual issue or an organisational issue, but there's also a huge economical issue as well. So the Office for National Statistics shows that at the moment there are 2.5 million people who are economically inactive due to long-term sickness. And that figure has increased significantly by over 400,000 since before the pandemic. We know that 1.3 million of those people are inactive for long-term sickness because of depression or anxiety. And that's up 50% since before the pandemic as well. There was a huge number of those people, around 200,000 of them, that feel able to come back to work and want to get back into work, but they're facing huge barriers to re-enter the workforce for lots of different reasons. So the figures show the significant role that mental health issues play in economic inactivity as well, and a need for workplaces to prioritise being open, supportive, and inclusive around employees' mental health and well-being. Research by Gallup found that employees who feel included and supported at work are 3.5 times more likely to be engaged in their role. And similarly, a Deloitte study found that organisations who've got a strong sense of diversity, equity and inclusion do see a 17% increase in team performance and a 29% boost in collaboration as well. So again, psychological safety is not just about individual well-being, it's a huge business imperative as well. So that's our introduction. We're going to do a quick poll now. The reason we do our My Whole Self campaign is that lots of people don't feel able to bring their whole self to work and therefore don't feel psychologically safe in the workplace. So we'd like to hear from you now about what do you think is the biggest barrier to bringing your whole self to work. There's a couple of options in the poll. There may be other answers that you'd like to give in the chat as well, but we'll just give you a moment just to complete the poll and we'll have a look at some of those results. Okay, so results wise, we've got fear of judgment is our highest reason for a barrier, I guess. Company culture is followed shortly after, workload and lack of role models thereafter. In the chat, people have talked a lot about trust, they've talked a lot about discrimination, they've talked about their manager being a barrier and poor management, conscious and unconscious bias at play in the workplace. A lack of supportive policies and processes as well, and just a lack of support really about support for people's personal lives and the things that are going on for them, and perhaps not a recognition that that's an important part of someone's life. The role of the manager is hugely important in terms of supporting psychological safety. So leading teams in a way that brings their whole selves to work and ensuring psychological safety means that you really need people managers with the skills and confidence to support people. Some of our research shows that actually people managers really believe in wanting to lead a team around psychological safety, but really actually don't feel that they have the knowledge, the skills or the confidence to know how best to do that. We're really, really proud that last week we were able to launch a new training program for people managers who want to understand mental health, how it links to people's performance, and how to create those psychologically safe environments to support their teams. So do check out our website for more information about the course, and do get in touch with us if you'd like to have a conversation about it. I'm going to move on now and start the panel discussion. So the most exciting part of the webinar, so you don't have to listen to me for much longer. I'm going to go to our panelists and ask a few questions. So Melissa, I'm going to come to you first. Obviously, your role at Henley Business School is all about research and research that focuses on workplace psychology. So I'd be really interested to hear from you. What does the latest evidence tell us about the importance of psychological safety at work?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. And I mean, Henley Business School are really delighted this year to have partnered with Mental Health First Aid England to do some research, particularly around this area, and presenting the white paper, which will obviously be launched as part of this event today. So as part of that, we surveyed 2,000 employees across the UK and asked them about a range of different factors to do with how much they felt they could bring their whole selves to work, how much they felt this was impacting on things like their productivity, well-being, and their engagement at work. And we also asked them about psychological safety. And exactly as you said, psychological safety operates on various different levels. So there's how much you feel that as an individual, there is what's happening within your team or department, there is the role of the line manager in influencing psychological safety. And exactly as the poll showed, that there is also how psychological safety operates at a cultural level across the whole organisation. And there were some really interesting findings there, I think, for individuals and organisation and line managers to think about how they can foster psychological safety. So, for example, what we found from the data is that there was a general consensus that being able to bring your whole self to work was really important. So 81% of people felt that was very important. And yet, in practice, only 41% of people felt that they were actually able to do that. And what the data actually showed us is how that really did impact on things like people's engagement at work. So I think one of the findings from the survey that we were all quite surprised about is that only 17% of people felt that they actually wanted to go to work every day. So there was a real impact on engagement. I think there were another sort of key messages that came out of the research. And that was that really people's individual experiences in work were very different. So when we looked at who was able to bring them the whole self to work, who were most likely to feel psychologically safe, there were some disparities. So we found that junior staff were less likely to be able to feel that they were psychologically safe or that they could bring them whole selves to work. Also employees who were neurodiverse and those who had mental health disabilities. So there was a sort of range of different people that were having a different experience at work. So I think there's some real kind of key messages there in terms for organisations about recognising that people have very unique experiences within the workplace.
Thank you, Melissa. And I guess in your research, what have you seen? What's come through as some of the biggest barriers that mean that people don't feel psychologically safe at work and they can't bring their whole self to work?
Yeah, so I think the biggest barrier, I think, was very much about awareness and understanding people's, how the different perceptions about how people operate and, people's experience in organisations. Across the board, when we looked at the research, senior managers had much better experiences in work. They were way more engaged in their work, and they felt much more psychologically safe at work. So able to express their opinions, able to take risks, and a sense that they would actually be able to, to show up as their authentic selves at work. But they also had a mismatch in how much they overestimated other people could. So I think the real barrier here is about awareness. So understanding for senior managers and line managers in organisations is that everybody's having a very different experience. So I think it's really sort of understanding that, raising awareness and seeing, understanding how people, there are these differences for individuals.
Brilliant. Thank you, Melissa. That's really, really insightful. I'm going to come to Layla now. So, Layla, your day job is fantastic, working within the NHS, which is brilliant. But you're also an author as well, and you've written a book called Breaking the Rainbow Ceiling, where you explore the barriers that LGBTQ plus professionals face in the workplace. So, I guess what would be great to hear from you is, what lessons are there from your book, and also if you feel comfortable sharing your own experiences. What lessons are there that are most relevant to help understand how to create psychological safety in today's workplaces?
Absolutely. Yeah, so my book looked at all sorts of aspects of how being an LGBTQ plus person can affect your career. And I was really interested to see that 21% of LGBTQ plus people feel discriminated against at work, and that goes up to 36% for trans people. I mean, that is a huge thing that obviously affects psychological safety. But I think the important thing to understand, if you're a manager or a colleague, it's not just about you and how you interact with somebody, of course, because most queer people have had experiences throughout our whole lives of coming out to somebody and being rejected or hurt or discriminated against. So we've learned we can't always trust our own support systems. And I think it's really interesting to understand how these things manifest at work and get in the way of bringing your whole self to work. So maybe we're a bit more wary of sharing ideas or taking risks or bringing our full selves to the table, whatever that might look like. And in the research I was doing, I saw that 2 in 5 LGBTQ plus people are in the closet at work, mostly because they're worried about that sort of discrimination. And they aren't wrong. Every time we do come out, it can be really scary, and we know that we could get a bad reaction that could affect our job or affect our experience in the workplace. But I think it's interesting thinking about LGBTQ plus experiences in the wider context of all the sorts of diversity that we have, because what the research here told us is that if you feel unsafe to come out at work, then that can be really challenging for your performance at work. If we are out, we don't have to waste energy hiding our whole selves and worrying about somebody finding out something about us. So we are able to perform better, be more efficient, more creative, more confident, and happier at work. So and that's certainly something that I've experienced. When I started work, I was quite afraid to tell people that I was a gay woman. And then once I did, I felt very much more liberated to be myself and participate more and engage with people in their conversations about what they did at the weekend, rather than quaking quietly in the corner about that. And yeah, there's lots of different things that you can do, whether you're a manager or a colleague or a mental health first aider or whatever sort of relationship you have in the workplace. From the context of the LGBTQ plus research I did, really understanding that these worries are genuine. There's loads of research that shows that managers and colleagues are more likely to discriminate against you for being LGBTQ plus, and of course for other minority characteristics as well. So educating yourself about the experiences of those people and your staff in particular. So for example, being able to analyze a staff survey to figure out what are the different types of experiences that different folks are having within your organization, and what positive changes might you be able to make based on that. All sorts of things, uniform policy, parental policy, IT processes that could be better. There's all sorts of opportunities. There's a quote in my book that I liked from a queer person at work who said, "Nothing makes you feel othered like having to tick the other box in a staff survey." So there's lots of opportunities there, and you can make sure that you're accessible and that you can gain trust by showing that you're taking discrimination concerns seriously. We just did a survey at the NHS Confederation where we found that only 18% of LGBTQ plus staff felt that if they reported discrimination, then it would be taken seriously and dealt with appropriately. And then being aware of the importance of the visibility of senior LGBTQ plus staff, because there was so much research in my book that showed that thanks to glass ceilings and things, people with these minority characteristics are less likely to be promoted into the senior roles. But if you do see people who are a bit like you in those roles, it can have such a positive impact on being able to be your whole self at work in terms of confidence and belongingness and your own aspirations. So I think that thinking about how to achieve that is another one of those various opportunities that do exist.
Thank you, Layla, and thanks for sharing your lived experience as well there. That was, it's really, really important to hear, I think, some of those experiences that you've had and also some of that research within your book. Interestingly, I think one of the most we underestimate, I think, the power of how many people watch when we receive a complaint within a workplace and how we deal with that complaint, and therefore how that will lead to people, whether they've got trust in raising an issue, providing feedback, or being able to raise a complaint themselves as well. It can kind of make or break employee experience and psychological safety as well. So I'm glad that you touched upon that, because we hear about that quite often when we're working with workplaces ourselves here. Layla, the NHS is a huge employer. It's one of the UK's largest employers, and it's got a really diverse workforce. What are some of the key challenges and also some of the best practice that you've seen in creating inclusive leadership across such a massive organisation?
I mean, you're right. Working in a huge organization can be really complex because staff and patients come from all sorts of different backgrounds, cultures, different approaches, different expectations. So it can be challenging to achieve a cohesive sense of belonging, both in terms of team members and also more widely as an NHS staff member. And I'm particularly struck by discussions that I've had about how senior staff can feel quite remote sometimes in a large organization, which is so important when you're trying to set a culture for that organization. I sat on an inclusive leadership panel once with a senior NHS leader who told me that he was feeling quite pleased with himself for having decided he was going to be really accessible to all of his staff. He had open office hours, his door was open, he encouraged people to come and talk to him, but he hadn't thought through about how many of his staff were working different hours than he was or in different buildings, so they couldn't really get there. All these different variables that mean that sometimes you make an assumption as a leader that you are being accessible and inclusive, and you really genuinely believe that you're doing everything as well as possible. But then you speak to people and you realize actually there are more opportunities for you to improve. And we have worked at the NHS Confederation with senior leaders across the whole NHS, looking at how do you develop leadership behaviours. We have a little pledge on our website. Thousands of NHS staff have pledged their commitment. So we see inclusive leaders as people who take action to create change and innovate while balancing everyone's views and needs. People who've got the courage to take conscious steps to break down barriers for everyone, and actively seeking difference, inviting and welcoming people's contributions, and taking steps to get as much engagement as possible in decision making. So essentially, in summary, our good practices for inclusive leadership in the NHS are to be approachable and accessible to help create a sense of belongingness for colleagues, to be kind and respectful, to get to know colleagues and show an interest in who they are, listening actively, making sure that colleagues feel heard, supporting and empowering colleagues and giving everybody constructive feedback, being as free of judgment as possible, and taking action that make things better for everyone. These are some of our principles, and it's really nice to see that people are signing up to them and thinking about how to implement them in practice.
Brilliant. Thank you, Layla. Lots of great food for thought in there. I'm going to come to you now, Lauren. You work in employee relations in a unique manufacturing sector, cheese production. As we know, we've got lots of cheese fans in the chat. What are some of the specific challenges that you face in your sector and your organisation when you're supporting workforce wellbeing?
Yeah, of course. So, yeah, we are a business down in Somerset. We are very proud to have 15 different nationalities across the 200 staff that we have here. But we also work across 7 days a week. There isn't a day of the week where we don't have people on site doing something. And the hours can be mixed. So sort of relating to what Layla said, office staff are here from 8 till 4, but production could be here at 10 o'clock at night. They might be here on a Saturday. So we have a team of 18 mental health first aiders now, so nearly 10% of our workforce, and they are split across all the shift patterns that we have, so that there is a mental health first aider accessible to each team, basically at all times, or at least weekly, that they are available. But we also, where we have the different nationalities on site, we do support one common language when they're working in group settings, so that people can build those relationships, get to know each other. But we also understand that English not being a first language, we need to provide the tools to build the confidence for people to be able to communicate. So last year, we put 15 colleagues through ESOL, which is English speaking for other languages. They completed that in work time, so that it gave them the tools and the confidence to be able to communicate with others, particularly on the production lines, and then also at break times. So we also have the side of production that is very physical. It's manual labour. So from a well-being point of view as well, health and safety is obviously our key priority. But last year as well, we put everybody through level 1 health and safety training to provide them the background and the why we do what we do, why we put things in place, and the importance of, you know, keeping ourselves safe, but also everybody else around us. And we have in place healthcare for our guys, which has the 24/7 access to a GP, because calling a GP at 8 o'clock is all very well and good, but if you finished a shift at 6 a.m, you don't want to be waiting up to access and try and get hold of a GP. So actually it's available 24/7, so they can call whenever they need it. So yeah, there's lots of things that we can do. But yeah, very, very unique setting that we have here, and lots of different people and different hours that we try and cover and support.
I think that's really important, isn't it? We've talked a lot about getting to know the individual and understanding them and what support they might need. But every organisation will have its own unique culture. And so for yours, you know, shift working, sleep, physical safety, not just psychological safety, are crucial factors as part of your culture and enablers, I guess, in terms of being able to help people feel psychologically safe and support them with well-being. What do you think, if there was one thing that you've done at Norseland that's had impact on inclusion or employee well-being, you know, what do you think's had the biggest impact in your organisation?
So we have what we call a social committee. So we try and organise social events throughout the year, which are outside of work time, things like go-karting, paintballing, even cinema trips, because at the end of the day, we spend a third of our day with the people we work with. So encouraging those social settings, those personal relationships is really important for us. We want people to get to know each other, so that when they are here at work, you know, they can have shared break times with each other, they can talk to each other, but they can also go out at weekends and do something non-work related. Over the last year, we held a summer party. So we had a barbecue on site down at our field at the bottom. People brought their family members, partners, someone even brought their dog to run around. And luckily you could get into the factory and get hold of any cheese. But it was just nice that we can bring the families together as well. But we also this year, we shut the factory for a day. And we got everyone together for a sort of post-Christmas, because as you can imagine, Christmas in a cheese factory chaos, so staff events prior to Christmas is a nightmare. So we did something in January, shut the factory for the day, had a very short 1-hour presentation, and spent the rest of the day doing a murder mystery and having a nice 2-course dinner, mixed with people we don't normally work with. So we mixed all the tables, so people had the opportunity to talk to those that might be field-based or work on a different shift pattern to them at a different building. And that was really important for us. You know, we invested in that to shut the factory and made sure everyone was there, so that they could all come together and get to know each other, really. But also what we did last year, we rolled out a mental health survey to understand what our teams want and what's important to them. And we recently introduced a night shift. So they're about a year in now into working nights. And some of them were really struggling with balancing night shift working, family life, and actually having a social life as well. How can you fit all that into one day? So what we've done is we've worked with a local occupational health provider to sort of get an hour's talk put together, that they'll come in and speak to our nights team and understand what it is that they want to know, what questions they have about how to balance nights, and then give them some sort of medically based information about how they can best sort of wind down after their night shift. And it's things like when to last have your caffeine drink, and Red Bull at 5:30 in the morning if you're finishing at 6 and trying to go to sleep isn't probably going to be good for you. So what is it that we can provide on site? We've got water on site, but is it decaf coffee that's required? Just to give them the tips and hints of how to balance that, so that our teams have that work-life balance as well, because that's still really important to us. Yes, we want them to come to work and do a great job, but we don't want them to then go home and have no time to do the nice things, and wind down. So yeah, we've had lots of things to put in place. Obviously, we're still on a journey. As I said, we've recently just brought in another sort of 10 mental health first aiders. So we're going through, this year will be a real journey on what we can put in place to support everyone within the business.
Brilliant. Lots of love in the chat for some of those things that you're doing. But I guess, Lauren, the key to a lot of what you're creating is connection, collaboration. You talk a lot about socializing, but effectively it's all about helping people to get to know each other better and to build that trust and that connection with each other.
Exactly, yeah. The trust that they will then, and the confidence to come to us as mental health first aiders as well, but also to reach out to our colleagues, and just that conversation can reduce a load so much. So yeah, it's a really positive thing for us to have those people building relationships and going for lunch all together. As a team, our directors come for lunch with us. They're not sat in a separate room. We all go and have lunch. If we can sit outside, then we try and make the most of that. So yeah, it's very positive.
Brilliant. I think that there's a couple of key points to kind of add to your brilliant examples of socializing. Obviously, some organisations create space to do that socialising within work. I sometimes go and talk to workplaces who have a challenge, people wanting to socialise outside of work hours, or even being able to socialise out of work hours because of their commitments. So there are small acts of connection that can be facilitated within the working day and the working environment. Your example there of closing the factory to kind of create that space is brilliant. And I suppose the other thing to acknowledge is sometimes there are people who is their idea of absolute hell, trying to do a social activity, or sometimes forced fun, as sometimes people refer to it. So I think there's an importance, isn't there, about really getting to know your staff and what would work for them and how they would want to do that connection, and in what way and what they'd like or what they wouldn't like as well, and let individuals have an element of choice in that as well.
Yeah, definitely. That's important. We put out before we did our social events of what people want to see and also what works for them, because where we have a mix of nationalities, some people don't have the family support round to look after their children at a weekend. So that's why we do some family events, so that they can bring their children along to help as well, but also not what we want sat here in the office. What do our teams want to go and do? So yeah, paintballing and football is normally the fun one. I don't tend to choose to do that myself, but the guys like it, so that's important to them.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, Lauren. I'm going to open up now to questions. We've got quite a few questions that have popped up in the chat. One of the key things that's kind of in the chat, but also in the Q&A function, is some organisations are quite small and don't necessarily have budgets to spend on creating psychologically safe cultures or socialising or connection or team building. So it'd be good to hear kind of from the panel about, are there kind of small acts of inclusion and connectivity and psychological safety that you can do that don't have a direct cost to them either for an organisation or for an individual, I guess, if there's things like socialising involved. So I'm going to come to you, Layla, first and see what you've got, and then we'll ask the rest of the panel.
Thank you. Yeah, there's all sorts of things that you can do that I think you can integrate into the workday without significant expense. And I really appreciate everybody's perspectives on how not every type of social activity works for all people. I think that's really important to understand. And for example, we in my organisation have been looking at how to reduce the amount of things that involve alcohol, because some people don't want to drink alcohol. How do we have events in quieter places, because some people have hearing problems? There's lots and lots of different types of diversity to take into account, and that certainly has been a challenge for us. But I would suggest things like for example, integrating nice little things within any sort of staff away days you're having. Currently, I'm having staff away days in the office, but various people within my small team will take responsibility for thinking of a fun bonding activity to do within that context that doesn't require any particular expense. We do quite a lot of bartering. I'll do a talk at your staff day if you'll do a talk at my staff day, sort of things to try to bring in diverse speakers and get people to do some interesting bonding activities together, things that you can do at lunchtime, all of those sorts of things. And also, many of you, I'm sure, will have staff groups for different types of diversity or different types of interests. And I think that those are often quite nice places to be able to bring activities and people together in ways that don't necessarily need to cost anything. I think there's lots of opportunities in these smaller scale engagements.
Brilliant, thank you. Melissa, is there anything that you've seen in the organisations that you've worked with as part of your research of suggestions or ideas for this?
Yeah, sure. I think psychological safety is something that is possible to generate without any cost, really, because actually, if we think about some of the conditions for psychological safety, it is things about does my opinion feel like it counts at work? Do I have autonomy over my role? If I bring up tough problems, will they be listened to? Are my contributions valued? So a lot of it is just about the culture. It is about, are people listened to? Do they feel that they can bring up opinions and voice problems? And that is the safety element of it. So I think much of this can be generated without any sort of expense. It's about listening, doing pulse checks, seeing how people feel, gauging things, and giving people opportunities to have their voice and opinion heard.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a question in the Q&A about sort of the role of leaders. So a couple of you touched on this, but that whole idea of role modeling, the idea of being able to be vulnerable and bringing your whole self to work. So I guess the question is, if you were a leader and there were aspects of yourself that you did want to talk about in the workplace to show that you were bringing your whole self to work and hopefully therefore pave the way for others to feel like it's an environment for them to be able to share, what kind of tips would you have for a leader to how do they start going about talking about themselves or sharing that vulnerability or a bit more about themselves? I'm going to come to you, Lauren, first, and then perhaps Layla again.
Yeah, of course. So I think it's really the openness and making themselves visible to others within the business, and also even things like going on the mental health first aid course and then talking about that. Being mental health first aiders within a leadership team it's really important because it shows their interest. So I think that's really important, and making themselves visible. And we have an intranet, for example, that anyone can post on. So those leaders posting things about mental health campaigns or the mental health theme days, that's really important as well, because they see that drive from the top, and the support that the managers have, and giving it time is also really important. Them taking time out of their day to focus on those initiatives is really important.
Thank you. And Layla?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because when you talk about minority characteristics, particularly ones that are not visible, the evidence tells us that lots of senior leaders think that they are super visible, think that whatever their type of diversity is universally known, but actually the research shows that's not the case at all. So if leaders want to have that positive impact, they actually need to make sufficient effort that you almost feel like you're talking about it, inverted commas, too much, so that you're talking about it enough that you're having that positive impact that you want to have, which I thought was really interesting, because I do sometimes feel, gosh, I'm always talking about being a gay woman, but actually I do try to always talk about being a gay woman because the research tells us that that's where you have the impact. And obviously how you do it depends on your personality, on whatever type of sensitivity it is that you're trying to talk about. But some of the evidence that I found in my book was that it's helpful, for example, to write a personal blog sometimes, perhaps tie it to one of the one of the relevant days that's relate to whatever diverse characteristic you might be mentioning. So doing those sort of explicit things is really helpful. Doing potentially talks is really helpful, but actually it's also really helpful to just drop these things into everyday communications that you're having with all staff, with your teams, and empowering other people who want to talk about the sorts of characteristics that you also have, for example, by chairing an all-staff discussion where lots of other people from within your organization want to talk about something, but you're providing that senior sponsorship and support that empowers them to be able to do that just that little bit more safely. I think there's lots of different ways to do it, and being quite conscious of how am I making sure that across the organization staff are benefiting from whatever diverse characteristics or related things that I have that I want to share with them, rather than just assuming it will happen naturally.
Brilliant. Thank you, Layla. There's a really great question in the Q&A, actually. Really happy with this question. But somebody said, you know, if you're in the employment market and you're looking for a new role with an organisation, what might the signs be that you could spot in your kind of application process that an organisation is doing really great things around psychological safety? And there's a follow-up question to that, which is, you know, is there a particular question that you could ask in an interview that would help you to assess whether that organisation is going to create that psychological safety and be the right fit for you? So I'm gonna come to Melissa first, just to see if there's anything from a research perspective where you've seen this kind of work with organisations.
Oh, it's such a good question. I think I can only probably talk about it from maybe a kind of personal experience. And if I was looking at an organisation and thinking about how much they were genuinely fostering psychological safety, then I'd probably be doing just some kind of research around looking at things like LinkedIn posts to see, you know, how do the sort of senior leaders, how do the senior people in that organisation present themselves? What's some of the issues that they're talking about? I think I'd also be looking at things like Glassdoor for, you know, employee reviews to see what it's like to work in that organisation. It's a really good idea to kind of get a sense check for it. And I think as a candidate, then I'd also be looking at them in terms of their recruitment processes. So, for example, I think there are many things that you can do as an organisation to really improve your recruitment processes, to make that much more inclusive. So, for example, you know, it might be about sort of, you know, asking people in advance if they, you know, if they need, if there's anything they need in terms of neurodiversity. For example, you know, sending interview questions out in advance is a great way to support people who are neurodiverse. So I'd be really looking at them in terms of, you know, what are they modeling in terms of their behavior, and you know, what are some of the employer reviews around that. But also, you know, how authentic is some of that stuff in terms of, you know, what they're posting out there about their senior leaders.
Great tips there. Thank you, Melissa. And Lauren, is there anything that you would add from your experience?
I think within sort of HRC recruitment is a big thing for us, but I always feel how, it's kind of touching on what Melissa said, how they communicate to you prior to the interview is really important, and the information they give you. So even down to where to park and where to go, it sounds like such small details, but that really shows that the employer is sort of caring about you from the start and providing that information, because that can be a really scary thing if you're going into and you've got a big gate in front of you, and giving you information about who the interview panel is, so you can do the research and have a look into them, but also you know the name, you might know the face, and they give you enough time for an interview brief. It's just little things I would say to look out for during the communication side of the process as well. You know, is it mainly done on phone to check in on how you're doing ready for the interview if they had any questions, or is it email because that's less familiar, less friendly maybe? So I think, yeah, definitely how they present rather than sort of a question, because there's a comment in the comment section about, you know, a lot of places say, oh, we're a family feel, but how they present themselves speaks a lot louder than the words that they use. So I would definitely say the preparation leading up to it and the information they've provided you would be a huge sign of the culture there.
Brilliant, thank you. One final question for our panel before we move on and talk a little bit more about some of the resources we've got to support our webinar attendees. But Obviously, there is a huge narrative at the moment around equality, diversity, and inclusion, and it's being debated quite a lot in the news at the moment. And I've spoken to a number of people who are concerned that their workplace might do a bit of a U-turn around equality, diversity, and inclusion. So, are there any kind of practical tips, perhaps for those of us who are working in sort of the HR space or the strategic leadership space to help their organisation to not make a U-turn on diversity, equality and inclusion? What can we do to keep it going and almost, if anything, double down on the efforts because of the significant benefits to people's mental health and well-being? So Layla, I'm going to come to you if that's okay.
Yeah, and I know this is a difficult issue for a lot of people at the moment. And I think that really it boils down to understanding what your values are as an organization and really making sure that all of the decisions that are being made are being looked at from the lens of are these decisions in line with our values, and are they delivering our strategy of what we want, and really understanding that link between valuing equality, diversity and inclusion, as in these three separate practices, and understanding why you're doing that, not just because it's a nice to have that you could delete depending upon the political preferences of the day, but actually the purpose of having those things is to deliver better performance and better outcomes from your organization. So being clear on what the values are and being clear on what your objectives are, and just being a bit bold and brave in the face of a complex political situation.
Brilliant. Thank you, Layla. I'm really heartened, actually. There's lots of comments in the chat where some workplaces' chief executives have come out and said, we are not rolling back on equality, diversity and inclusion, and have made quite a public commitment to that. And actually the impact that that's had on the people that have worked there has been really quite powerful and reassuring for people. So definitely encourage organisations to promote the fact that they are against this and will not be rolling back. A few resources to help some of the attendees on today's webinar that will help you hugely. So as part of our My Whole Self campaign, we add additional resources to our website every year. We obviously want workplaces where everyone feels safe to bring their whole self to work if they choose to. And so we've got a number of tools available to help you to do this within your workplaces. So what you can see there on screen is we've got a manager's toolkit. So if you're a people manager and you're not quite sure where to start or how to have conversations around My Whole Self, or how to take steps to improve psychological safety, then that's a toolkit for you. We have also got, we have launched our My Whole Self, My Guide for Working Well as a new resource this year. That effectively is really useful for people managers and individuals within their team to sit down and have a chat about the individual. So what motivates them at work, what keeps them healthy at work, perhaps if they've got a diagnosed health condition or mental health issue or a disability that requires a reasonable adjustment. The idea is that it gets you as a manager to know the individual and what works for them and what support they're going to need, so that you can put some things in place and you can kind of regularly keep that under review. So I'd encourage you to check that out. There are some links being posted in the chat now. We've launched some new research, as Melissa mentioned, in partnership with Henley Business School, which looks at psychological safety and how it motivates people and improves their performance as well. Interestingly, Melissa mentioned this before, only 17% of employees feel motivated to go to work each day, and 1 in 10 employees say they never feel inspired by their job. So, this is not just about psychological safety as a concept. This is about, there's a real decline in how people are feeling about the world of work at the moment. And so we need to put extra effort into really understanding our people, knowing what will help to engage, inspire and motivate them and get the most out of them, and how we can support them to be at their best. So do check out some of those resources, and they're all free and on our website, and there's some links in the chat. And finally, just to wrap up, one final question to the panel, and you've kind of got about 30 seconds each to give me a response to this. But if you could change one thing about workplace culture tomorrow, what would it be? I'm going to go to Melissa first. Sorry, I should have said that. Melissa, and then Lauren, and then Layla.
30 seconds. I'm very quickly just going to completely support what Layla said. I think, we need to really, it's really important, I think, that organisations do kind of express their commitment to equality, diversity, inclusion. So for those organisations that are doing that, who are doubling down, who are like really, expressing that this is something that they're completely committed to, I think we just need to celebrate those and, make sure that we hear more of those, organisations.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Lauren?
I completely agree with Melissa and Layla, and I think that will only help build the trust of the teams and the people we work with to come forward and speak to us. And if I could change anything in an instant, it would be that instantly everyone had that trust and confidence, but it does take time. So I think working really hard as a business to have that visibility and openness is really, really important.
Thank you.
I would
Layla?
say essentially the same thing. I think it's so important that we genuinely care about what are the different things that affect people's experiences at work and affect people's progress in their careers. And by properly caring about that and thinking, what can we do to address it? That's how we can really achieve people being able to thrive as their whole selves at work.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. A huge thank you to our panelists for some great insights. A huge thank you to our webinar attendees, actually. There's been some amazing suggestions and insights and tips in the chat as well. Please do download some free resources in our My Whole Self section of our website. Have a think about sharing a My Whole Selfie on social media today. If you're not quite ready to take part in the My Whole Self campaign today, because it's a bit newer to you and you want to plan a little bit more, as I said, it's an all year round campaign. So take a look at our resources and see if you want to plan some activity in at any time of the year, not just on My Whole Self Day. You will get a copy of the PowerPoint slides and the recording from today's session, as we talked about earlier. And once you've finished today, you'll get a quick survey that will pop up when you close the webinar, and your feedback will be really, really most welcome to help understand what's worked well today and how we can improve our webinars in the future as well. Our panelists' LinkedIn profiles are now going into the chat as well if you want to connect with them. So please do feel free to connect with them. And I do wish you a very, very good My Whole Self Day and a great rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Thanks so much.